afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. We're putting on a program for CAI, and it is Condo HOA Q&A, Know Your Role. Before I get started, I know you saw a scroll on a disclaimer, but I'd like to read this. The views and opinions expressed in today's presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy, position, or endorsement of CAI Illinois. Any content provided by our speakers are of their opinion and are not intended to constitute legal advice. Whereas each community association requires specific considerations, attendees should not act upon this information without seeking professional counsel. My name is Pete Santangelo, and I'm the president of Wintrust Community Advantage. I'll be the moderator for this presentation today, and I've been part of CAI for over 20 years and on various committees. But today we're talking about roles and responsibility of board members and property managers. Remember that we work within an interrelated structure of federal, state, and local regulations. In addition, we must adhere to our declaration, bylaws, and house rules. We're happy to host a team of experienced board members and property managers to address your questions about how to operate efficiently and appropriately within this complex environment. And with that said, I'll turn it over to the panel members to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Diana.
My name is Diane Pagoulatos. I live in Lake Bluff in a 211 community of townhomes and condominiums. I have been a member of CAI since 2009, starting out attending the homeowner sessions, which were a panel of consultants and experts. From there, I started volunteering and in the homeowner committee, the homeowner leader committee, which I'm presently on. I have been a part of the CAI board for a period of 3 years. I've also been on the ILAC fundraising committee, of which I co-chaired with Cindy Fitz for 3 years. I've been presently, I'm on the ILAC committee. I am a graduate of the DECAL program, which was a natural outgrowth of attending the CAI events, the networking, and also the homeowner leader panels. The DECAL program is a group of 7 classes, which provide you with information on a variety of topics that have to do with community governance. I just completed the DECAL class, and so I can say I'm a graduate. And the offerings that we have, the next DECAL class, so you can sort of take advantage of this opportunity to learn more about community governance, will be on September 15th, and it is a virtual, and the title will be Rules and Regs. So look for that. It's between 5 and 8 on September 15th.
Thanks,
Hi,
Diane.
Sorry.
Carolyn, Greg, Nikki.
Yep. I'm Carolyn Haack. I reside in Glenview in the Orchard Glen condominiums. We have 3 buildings and a swimming pool. I get to chair both my building board and our master board, so I have plenty to keep me busy. I joined CAI in 2012 and became a DECAL several years after that. The education's been invaluable. We had a very volunteer board without a lot of knowledge, and it really has given me the confidence to, I think, keep us out of some potentially pretty deep waters. So I would encourage you guys to look around, look at our pre-taped education sessions that are out there, and join us in the current virtual and the in-person meetings. We'd love to see you in person.
Thanks, Carolyn. Nikki or Greg? Greg?
My name's Greg Rithmiller. I'm the director of property management at Heil House Martin Goli, located in Skokie, Illinois. I've been in residential property management for almost 19 years, and I've been a member of CAI for over 18.
I am Nikki Ledwell. I've been in condominium management since 2009. Currently, I work for RealManage. I've been there since 2019. I am a senior community association manager. And I am also the chair of the Homeowner Leader Education Committee with CAI. And we have a lot of great events coming up, and we really hope that you can join us.
Great. As you can see, we have an experienced panel here with us. The first topic we want to touch on is roles of the board officers. And we want to give a perspective, I think, starting with the property managers and then hearing from the board members to see what your opinion is of each of the officers' roles. Nikki or Greg, would one of you want to start?
Well, I can start. The first thing I'd recommend for anybody, any board member or anybody thinking about getting on the board is to review your association declaration. Frequently in the declaration or bylaws, you'll see a description of what each officer's responsibilities are. Further, if you do go to the CAI website, there's additional materials there that you can obtain that maybe will discuss the responsibilities of each officer in a little more detail. One of the things to keep in mind is your role as a board member is you have a fiduciary responsibility. Probably everybody kind of knows that, but I think in simple terms, it's to put the association ahead of anything you want done personally. You're supposed to do it for the betterment of the community. You do it to treat everyone equally. And it's a very important thing. And in my 19 years of doing this, there's times where I've seen maybe board members get away from understanding what the fiduciary responsibility is. And there's times that we have to remind them of what their responsibility is. Nikki, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add as far as responsibilities.
Sure. So I would say to take a look at generally what the rules are. And I would say, again, like Greg said, always check your governing documents. And if you're from outside of Illinois, make sure to check any laws in different states. But with the secretary, they normally take the minutes and ensure that all of the information is up to date and documented. With the treasurer, they are generally responsible for, with a management company, they review the financials, they make sure everything's correct. A lot of times they are one of the signers to approve invoices or the only signer. And with the president, their job is generally to keep order at meetings. I think that's one of the biggest responsibilities as a president. They are also generally the ones that will sign the contracts. I've seen the president or even the secretary be the main signer for contracts. And really it's to keep order, to make sure everyone does what they're supposed to do. And sometimes they get that nice little gavel.
Diane, Carolyn, your perspective?
My perspective of the president is to coordinate with the board members and management what's going on. Also to lead the meeting and be aware of procedures. Also, I think that the board members, the basic is to know the pulse of the community. As a board member, you need to be informed. You need to make sure that you have reviewed that packet before you get into that meeting. Also, you make sure that you know your working documents. The management company is also in partnership with you of knowing those documents, but it's your responsibility to know them, the rules, regs, the covenants, and also the current laws that are happening for condos. The Illinois condo law, be familiar with everything that you need for community governance.
Thank you, Diane. I've served basically in all the roles, and as a basic member, I think what Greg and Diane are saying is just key. You need to actually know your documents, and you need to hold the better good of the community above any other goal that you've got. So a lot of that, whether you're an officer or a board member, is looking ahead. What's coming at us? What's going to happen next year, the next 3 years probably? Nobody's got a crystal ball, but if you don't start thinking about it and planning for it, be sure that your finances are aimed in the right direction. You can find yourself in a difficult situation. So that's really every board member's responsibility. Then you get the secretary again takes make sure that the minutes of the corporation, most of us are incorporated, and these are actual business legal minutes. We have to have them. You don't get to not have time to write the minutes if you're the secretary. And may sign off on other things. Your treasurer will also be involved in tax returns. Most of us don't pay taxes, but we still have to file a return. It takes a look. In our situation, we have a master board, we have building boards. Sometimes an invoice gets posted in the wrong place. We need to get it back where it belongs, working with our property management. In a large organization, the treasurer may have some significant investment recommending to do. I'm not lucky enough to have that problem yet, but it's a goal. And then, as president, yes, we kind of lead the parade, make sure the meetings are orderly. You want to encourage every point of view, so there will be some disagreement, but we can disagree and still be civil with each other. And it's important to do that. So it's safe for people to express a concern that they have, or to express just a flat different point of view about it. We have a whole wide community, many different points of view. So make it safe for folks to talk, both to bring it up and not to get flamed, but still drive for results. Try to hold your meeting plan to an hour. Don't let people go round and round and round about the same thing if there's not new information. So there's some, basic organizational skills that are important if you're going to hold the gavel.
One
Well,
thing
great.
I'd like to add.
Go
One thing
ahead.
I'd like to add, when it comes to the meeting, I think it'd be a very helpful tip to make sure that there are no interruptions from the audience or the homeowners, that you have a homeowner section set for that time. And if there is someone that wants to ask a question or intervenes in the business at hand, you just say, that's for homeowner session. This is a business meeting and the business will be conducted as such. Also, there's times that you need to sort of monitor anybody that might sort of hijack it into a different, realm or questions. That way you keep the business going. One more thing as treasurer, I'd like to add, it's important that you keep your eye on those delinquent accounts. There are times when the manager can't be responsible for everything. So when you get that packet, look at those delinquent accounts and make sure you check with the management. How are we doing? Are we sending out, they pass we have a 30, 60, 90 day type of situation. 30 days, they get a call, 60 days, they get a letter, 90, they go to collections. So make sure that you keep your eye on those collections, because those can increase without, people paying attention. That's all I'd like to add. Thank you.
Just to kind of tailgate on what Diane said, it is very important to have an organized meeting, have an agenda, stay on agenda, save maybe question and answers till the end. One of the things when I talk about, been doing this for so long, I talk to homeowners and maybe why they quit going to meetings or they're not interested in participating on the board, is that the meetings tend to drag on and they're not coherent. It skips around from here to there and they don't quite honestly want to take their time. So it's important for everyone that the meetings are well organized, well orchestrated. You call on people, you recognize people to speak and keep them efficient. That'll help a lot. A couple other things that I've run into, just to say, when it comes to a vote, the president's vote is the same as any other board members. I know I'll get sometimes people will say, well, the president doesn't vote, kind of Robert's Rule of Order. They will just break the tie. That's not the case in condos or HOAs. Your vote is the same as the other 4, 7, 6 board members. So make sure the president is voting and not just waiting around till the time there is a tie. And also for the secretary only needs to take minutes on decisions made at the meeting. A lot of times we'll see minutes that are 3 pages, which is completely unnecessary. They'll write down comments from the homeowners, questions, and that's completely unnecessary. And it could lead to additional questions when a unit's trying to be sold or something like that when people review the minutes. So once again, sometimes people don't want to be secretary because they're afraid that they have to take, copious notes. They have to be pages long. Really, they aren't. They're simply the decisions that the board makes, the votes. And you may go a whole meeting discussion where the only thing you vote on at that meeting are the minutes. So don't feel that they have to be pages long and that everything has to be put down, just decisions. And that'll also help you, I think, find more people that may be interested in being a secretary and taking minutes at the meetings.
I wanted to add a couple of things to what was said as far as with the minutes. Again, we always want to check what the laws are in our states. In Illinois, we actually have to have them available for 7 years. So the unit owners or anyone on the board needs to be able to obtain them going back 7 years. The other thing I wanted to add, as like Greg said, when it goes to closing. So some of the documents that are included in any sale for an association is 12 months worth of minutes. So you want to make sure that you do keep them professional, and it's listing the motions, who was at the meeting, when it started, when it ended. And a copy or a draft option is available on CAI website that'll help walk you through, and it's just fill in here and there. So that way you have the accurate notes that you need to meet all of the requirements set by the law.
Thanks, Nikki. I know we gave an overview of the board. We didn't talk about the manager's role that much, but there is a question, and it said, please be clearer about the manager role. If the meeting is not orderly, should the manager do anything? If non-owners attend the meeting, should the manager say something, or does the president have to be the bad guy?
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask. I was going to bring up, does the manager run the meeting, or does the board, particularly the board president, run the meeting? Generally, in most of my situations, the president runs the meeting. I work with the president to put together the agenda for the meeting, maybe a week or so in advance, and then we try to follow that agenda. Occasionally, people will get, blurt out and have a question or something like that. As somebody mentioned, it's best to say, can you please hold that till the end of the meeting? Board meetings are for residents to observe and listen, not necessarily participate. Although for condos, I do recommend having a question and answer at the end. What I'll do is if it does get out of hand, I hate to say it, people raising their voices and things, I will stand up, and ask them to please, sit down, use a better voice, try not to be argumentative. If it does get out of hand and people are kind of just repeating the same thing over and over, I will whisper to the president to say that, we need to move on to the next topic. We understand what you're saying. We'll look into it. Maybe we'll have a response the next meeting, or maybe the response then that you've passed a rule and the rule is going to stay and the board entirely agrees upon that. So yeah, we do try to keep the meetings moving along, and sometimes the manager does have to step in and try to help out. I had that a few weeks ago where somebody kept questioning a policy. I explained to him that, we cleared this with the village, was taken into account. The attorney was taken into account. We weren't going to change anything as far as this rule that went into effect.
And the president being a bad guy, let's not go too far down that road. The president is in fact chairing the meeting and has the responsibility to keep things in line. And part of the skill set, I guess, is to keep your cool. So if somebody, I spent too many years in retail, you find a calming phrase and you say it again and again, and if necessary, again. I'm sorry, we'll need to deal with that at the end of the meeting. Do you have new information to add? We understand your original point, noted. Some way, somewhat neutrally, to move the meeting forward, while with luck being able to make this person feel heard if they're on the board. If they're not on the board, then definitely defer it. We used to have our owner input time at the beginning of the meeting and discovered that it basically covered the entire agenda before we ever called the meeting to order. So I moved it to the end to avoid that problem. And at that point, you can establish a 3-minute limit or something like that to keep people from keeping you up till midnight. But I would not look at it as being a bad guy. We have a job to do. It's fairly mechanical. We need to keep the gears greased.
The next question is.
Well, I just want to add real quick, Peter, is
Okay,
that
go ahead.
part of a board's role is to be the enforcer, right? So you have those governing documents set into place and the board's job is to enforce them. So like Diane was saying about collections or Carolyn. So sometimes it may come across that the board president is being the bad guy, but he's not. He's just showing what the rules and regulations are generally and how they need to be done differently or adhered to. I would say that as far as who leads the meeting as a portfolio manager, it's a little bit different for every board for me. Some board presidents, I make the agenda with them, we have time limits and they walk their way through it. I'm just there if they have any questions. Then I have boards where I go from topic to topic, but they make the motions and the decisions. So just like talking to different people, there can be a little variation as to who's like leading the way down the agenda. But as far as keeping the meeting in order, I can see where it would be the president and the manager. The manager can ask for the meeting to adjourn depending on how loud or if there's threats of violence, or the board president can also clear the room if it becomes too confrontational.
I agree.
Great.
In our association, we have, our president was rather shy, so he turned it over to me as secretary. And we have a unique system that way. We do the agenda with 1 week in advance. I ask for agenda items and the board members give the agenda items and the management. Then when we lead the meeting, no matter who leads it as a president or a secretary, you need to keep the meeting moving. You need to stick to the agenda. You need to keep the topics moving. We've had interrupters where we've had to seek legal assistance and send them a cease and desist letter. We've done that. And if you keep the meeting going and you tell people, we'll get to your point or further talk to the manager about this, you can move it along and people get the message after a while that that is the way you're going to operate the meeting. There is going to be no interrupters. There's going to be no hijacking the topics. You just keep it moving. And that's what I suggest you do. Stick to the agenda, keep it moving, have phrases like, we understand, duly noted, and we understand your concerns. We could talk about it at a later date.
Great. We have a few more questions, but let me ask the audience, if you do have any questions going forward, please enter them in the chat. Is a management contract requiring a single point of contact, in our case, the president, common?
Yes. In
Yes,
our
it is.
instance, it is because not unfortunately, some boards, they have 14 members. So the manager is unable to take direction from 14 different people. So generally the president is the contact person. The board can elect a different person, but we generally go with one person. So they're able to give us how the board as a whole wants us to move forward, but we'd be unable to answer or to do 14 different people's actions and still keep the community moving forward.
And that's exactly it. Once again, it's efficiency and to use the time wisely for your manager. There may be 14 people. I've got a building that's got 37 board members. We meet every month, every other month. If they all 37 sent me something to do, we would never have anything by the time I got to a meeting. So we rely on the president to find out what the concerns are, to prioritize those, and then send them to us. And conversely, I usually respond back to the president and they disseminate the message to everyone. And that's, once again, efficiency. As a portfolio manager, you're not working with just one property, you're working with a number of them. So you've got to be able to use your time wisely and efficiently and according to what the management fee is that's being paid by each property.
And I also want to add is that when we have one point of contact and everyone on the team knows that that's who we're going to be working with, generally they all come together to make that decision. It's not all the time, but that's how it should be. When you have 14 or 20 people that are giving you different direction, it becomes difficult to see who's going rogue and doing what they'd prefer versus what the group as a whole prefers.
Okay, the one comment someone made is that, I think it was towards Diane, your comment. If everybody knows each other and most condo boards are informal, how do you keep that business-like manner with, your neighbors, especially if it's a small board? How do you keep that professionalism?
Well, like Greg said, the efficiency of the topics at hand, whether it's reviewing a bid, or it's discussing a situation that is imminent, pool violations, parking violations, you get the facts. And if you're dealing with a bid, you hear the bids, you discuss the bids, and you move on. You need to put the friendships and the other self-interests and the pet projects aside and deal with what's best for the community, what the majority of the residents are interested in and concerned with, and also your documents, the laws, and your advice from the management company. They're very valuable in providing what the going trends are, for example, the supply chain. You can't expect everything to happen just because the time frame you or your board wants. It all now depends on the supply chain, your budget, price increases, etc.
Yeah, we know each other. We're in some cases friends, but it's like, maybe think about going to play bridge. You go to play bridge, you got a set of rules. You got 4 places around the table. You know how the cards are dealt. You've got your bidding agreements with your partner, and you play by those rules for that period of time. After the game is done, fine, have a cocktail and enjoy your mixed nuts. But in the game, you play by the rules. In the meeting, run it the way it should be run, and you keep yourself out of a lot of trouble down the road.
And it may be beneficial for the president before the meeting starts to remind people that this is a board of directors meeting. The board will be handling their business. We ask for no interruptions or no questions during it, but we will have time for a Q&A once we complete the board's business. So that kind of helps too, to remind people that this is how it is. You're not singling out that one person by asking them to wait until the end of the meeting or the Q&A. Sometimes that's a friendly reminder, and people aren't quite so offended, and particularly if it's a new person attending the meeting.
I would add, you build up habits. You have business habits. You establish that it's a business meeting. It's not a social meeting. It's not a complaint forum. And that's what the roles and concerns of people at the end during the homeowner session will be discussed, and you move on, and people get the message.
And I would add that because some structure of association management is a business meeting, and there are legal steps again that you have to take and legal things that have to take place at the meeting. If it's a smaller association, you only have to have 4 meetings a year. So know that those 4 meetings are set up for business of the association and elections. There's a lot of legal things that must take place. But if you have a smaller board and people do like to get together, have coffee after the meeting. Say, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll visit after the meeting. Everyone will get together, or before the meeting. Say, okay, we're going to have the snacks before the meeting so everyone can talk and meet. As long as while that meeting is taking place, that is business. That is the business for the association.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, we have heard the minutes only record what was done. So if there is no votes taken, then our board doesn't do minutes other than to say who attended, which doesn't tell us much at all.
That's fine. You've got to have minutes, as Nikki said. You're required by the state of Illinois to have 4 meetings a year. So you need to keep minutes because that's the evidence that you kept a meeting. So as I said previously, you may go through a whole meeting and not vote on anything other than you adopted the meeting minutes to the meeting prior. That's fine. But at least you have it. If anything comes up, if a buyer wants to see minutes, that's all it'll show, but it'll prove that you had your 4 meetings a year as required by law.
Depending on your schedule, My approach is I'll schedule a monthly meeting for my boards. And my promise to the board members is if we have no action to take, I will cancel the meeting. And we do in fact do that. There's always somewhere in the year, there'll be 4 reasons to meet, not a problem. So if you regularly are seeing no actions were taken, the minutes are correct. These people were here. The minutes of prior meeting were adopted, not necessarily voted, but adopted because there were no corrections. Then you're done. But as a good use of time perspective, I would take a look then at whether that meeting should really have been held.
Okay,
I just want to add real quick, Pete, is that I agree completely with Carolyn. If you do not need to have that meeting, sometimes it's best to cancel the meeting. As long as you're having those 4 meetings in that year, then you're still meeting the requirements. Some boards, they don't need 5 or 6 or 1 a month. Make sure you have the meeting set up that your association needs. And as Greg was saying, it can just be accepting the minutes. Something that I also recommend putting in is if there's a contract and the board decides not to approve that contract or that project, that would also go into the minutes. So that motion is to table that. The motion could be to decide not to move forward with the project. So there's generally something you can put in there as long as you have something on the agenda. Otherwise, I agree with Greg. They can approve the minutes and even the financial status of the association at that time. This is how much we have in account X, Y, and Z.
and the last question was must the minutes be signed by the board?
In our association, the minutes are signed by the secretary. So if there's any questions years down the road, then there would be a history of who to talk to and who took those minutes. I think it's essential that they be signed, but I don't think it's required.
No, I don't believe it's required, but generally most of my cases, the secretary will sign them.
Ours are electronic, so we've got the secretary's name, but not an actual wet signature on paper.
Correct. Same with us.
And I've seen it both ways. I've seen where they do not sign them or it's not part of their process, but we generally recommend that even if they have not done it in the past, to consider doing it moving forward, because it just shows the validity of the minutes, in my opinion.
So we talked about roles of the boards and manager's role. I don't know if we want to talk any further about manager's role, but what if the association is self-managed? Do the roles of officer and board change? Is there any difference?
No, technically not. Once again, it's in your declaration, but I think you'll find them all pretty standard. The biggest difference is most likely the president's going to have to assign additional things for the board members to do. Since you don't have a management company, for instance, to get proposals, you may have to spread some of that out among the board members and ask them to meet vendors to get proposals for projects. Since you don't have a manager, maybe to do inspection of the building, you may assign that to one of the board members. So the duties will remain the same, but there may be additional that you'll have to take on. Perhaps the treasurer will do more of the accounting aspect. They may have to collect assessments, deposit assessments, pay bills, things like that. So there are a number of things, additional things the board will have to do if they're self-managed.
I agree. And I'd say, what does that look like, right? So does it look like financially? Does someone else collect the assessments? Does someone else file the financial documents? Who makes sure that you're following the laws that are up to date? Who's carrying the required certificates? So there's more to it maybe than just what you see that management does is usually a little bit more than what you see. For instance, as far as encouraging investments, making sure you're staying within the laws, taking the work orders, following up. So I would say it depends on the other services that you're outsourcing. So even if you don't have a manager, what does it look like for your accounting? What does it look like for your maintenance in the community?
If you
Okay.
are self-managed, make sure that you have the role of the professionals, the attorney, the accountant, so you have guidance as to what your path forward is in the business sense.
And following the laws. That's very important to
Following
make
the
sure you
laws.
know the Condo Act and the Common Interest Act, because it is always changing.
Registering with the state of Illinois, there's a lot to that.
So a follow-up question for the management panelists. What do you think is common for property inspections? Do you do it? If so, how often?
Most of ours are either once a month or twice a month. Most of our contracts state that. And most boards seem pretty satisfied with that. There may be occasionally where a building wants weekly inspections. Once again, that's a function of what each building is paying for management fees.
I agree. I would say with RealManage, as a portfolio manager for our associations that are contracted to have 12 visits a year, we have an inspector that goes out to check for violations and make sure everything's okay within the community. If I take a look at that association where they have a monthly inspector, I would still go out there at least 2 or 3 times a year myself. One, to see if anything's changing. Do I see water appearing where it should not be? Any other preventative maintenance I see, areas that need more attention. And also I know what the community looks like. If all the meetings are done online and we usually do everything online, it's hard for me to issue a work order or understand what the unit owner is saying if I've never been to the property.
So I think we covered the roles of the board officer and the manager's role, but on a day-to-day operation, can you kind of talk about what the board and manager role is? Maybe expand upon it. We touched on it a little bit, but maybe go a little deeper into the woods.
Well, I get a lot of communication from my owners. Some of it is better directed to the management company in the end, but on the other hand, it teaches me some things about what's going on in the community. We have a total of 102 units, so there's a lot of things can happen that I don't necessarily know about. We do have a good liaison between our management company and our maintenance contractor, so that's certainly helpful to us. We've contracted totally for financial services, accounting, collection of monthly assessments and stuff like that. So rarely do we get involved in any of that unless we just have a question about how something got posted on the ledger.
Yeah, ours can it can vary. As Nikki and I said, we're portfolio managers, so we may be dealing with a number of properties within the same day as opposed to just one all day. Ours is kind of broken up different. We have an accounting department. We also have what we're called our homeowner services department, which takes a lot of calls from the homeowners. Generally, the managers deal directly with the board. And in most cases, as we said, the president is the point of contact. So there may be interaction with our homeowner service department if they're unable to answer the homeowner's question. There's interaction with the accounting department. As Carolyn said, if there may be an issue with accounts receivable or potentially accounts payable, change in the budget or special assessments. Spend the day sometimes writing letters for people that perhaps are in violation. Sometimes they're violation letters, sometimes they're nice letters just asking to refrain from the illegal activity they're participating in, or sorry, the activity that's against the rules or governing documents. Sorry, illegal, kind of broad there. So and sometimes there's phone calls, with board members to try to get down to specifics, maybe on projects and things like that. Of course, then we're also at properties meeting vendors to get proposals, inspections, dealing with perhaps the maintenance people or cleaning company, discussing things with them. So it can vary from day to day. There's always something.
I would say for me, there will never be a day that Tuesday is exactly the same as Wednesday or Monday. Every day is a little bit different. As a manager, as a portfolio manager, I normally handle the escalated things. So we have an amazing customer service team, and then there are assistants for each property. And those assistants, they are rock stars. They offer the best service to the unit owners that are coming in with their regular concerns. Smaller work orders, modification forms, anything smaller like that. If there's a big leak in the building, that's something that I would take care of. Large projects, finding vendors, working with board members, property inspections, approving financials, approving management reports. We do a lot of the escalated items with unit owners, but generally we are overseeing the larger scale of the property in order to give a great report and feedback to the board.
A couple more questions came in, and I think this is related to the roles. Who keeps the minutes and responds to records requests if no professional manager is contracted?
Generally, the secretary keeps records and responds, but that's something that would have to be worked out between that board. But as a rule, that's generally what one of the secretary's responsibilities are.
And that would be, again, what self-managed looks like for that association. But keep in mind, there are laws. So let's say that secretary changes 3 times in those 7 years. We need to make sure that those minutes are properly following each time it changes. But yes, even with a management company, I highly recommend that secretaries keep their own records for the association as well, as far as their own copy of minutes and things that they sign.
Additionally, when there is a record request, there's a time limit on how the amount of time that the secretary or board member or whomever be responsible is to get that to the person that's making the request. So time is of the essence.
Yeah, and with the self-managed, it goes back to know the Condo Act, know the Common Interest Act for your states, because there are laws as to how things can be handled. Like Greg said, time limits, it can get more complicated.
Again, back to roles. Who technically should have signatory rights on a board?
As far as contracts or bank, as far as
It's vague. I think why don't you touch on both?
So anyone on the board can sign contracts. However, it goes back to our point of contact. We generally have it to where the secretary can sign them or the president, but our point of contact with the management contract is the president. So we recommend that they sign the contract and work with us on that. As far as signing invoices and checks, I've seen it where it is generally the treasurer, but I've seen where the president can also have authorization to approve the invoices. Greg, what have you seen?
I've seen that too. Generally, signatures for the reserve accounts are only the board of directors. Management doesn't have a part in that. If you're audited, your auditor will appreciate that, and if not, we'll make the recommendation. As far as the signers on reserve accounts, generally 3 or 4 board members, and then we require 2 signatures on each check by both board members, so there's a little check and balance there. And as far as signing contracts, generally the president or the secretary is the person done it, although anybody on the board can do it. And sometimes in cases where maybe one of the board members is going to chair, say, a special project, a large painting project or landscape project, then that person may be in charge of signing all the contracts related to that project.
So the manager is
things.
Sorry, Carolyn, go ahead.
No worries. Speaking of signing things, as the year changes, it's always wise to update your bank account signature cards so the right people are on it. We had a situation where one of the building boards had let things go and there was no one left who was able to sign anything at that bank. And getting that reinstated was really
we appreciate that, keeping your signature cards up to date, because we have people who are not or just got on the board and want to access the funds and they're not signers on the account. So you probably should when you're transitioning your board members, make sure you have signature cards on hand to put the new board members on. That's an
get
important,
the old ones off.
Right.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
And usually the timing is at the annual meeting, and that's a great time to do it. And when the secretary or treasurer goes to the bank, That is also noted that the bank will require the minutes and identification of those people. So that's another important facet of the minutes, to make sure that they're accurate when the annual meeting happens. Who are the new people? Who's going to be on those signature cards? That needs to be decided. And then the process should be going to the bank, changing the signature cards with the current minutes of who these new people are. Otherwise, other banks will say, no, we need to see the minutes.
Back to contracts and purchases. It says contracts regarding are pretty clear cut, but what dollar level would you say is the line between petty cash purchases and a purchase not contract that should have a pre-approval?
I guess we look at it as reoccurring expenses. Those would be, your utilities, maybe your landscape maintenance that's kind of consistent each month. You pay a contract or snow removal for each month. Generally, for other things, it's usually a $10,000 limit that we require approval by the board, even if it's a reserve expense. But a lot of times, you already have the contract signed, so you know what the amount's going to be.
And just to go back, the question was also how much petty cash they'd recommend keeping on hand. Was that the other part of the question?
I think it said, let's see, petty, regarding petty, clear cut, but what dollar level would you say is the line between petty cash purchases and a purchase not contract that should have pre-approval? So I guess what is a petty cash limit, and then over what limit would you say you need to get pre-approval on?
I would recommend no high. Again, this is something that you would have to talk to with your board and your association and make sure you go through it together to make it up. I would recommend not having more than $100 on hand for an on-site office. With a management company, it's a little bit different. But I would say any purchase that you're going to make for the association should be backed by at least one other board member in a whole board decision. If petty cash, as far as like, let's go grab donuts for the meeting, I would say up to $100 to have it, but collect those receipts. But that's really has to be a board decision.
And they followed up. They're just saying, wondering how much board members can spend without asking ours bought computers.
Yikes.
I would not, like, again, let's go back to the donuts, right? So I would say donuts possibly, but I feel like, and you'd have to check your governing documents and laws in your state, disclaimer, but any purchase that is made for the association should be approved by the board. And it's generally 2/3 of the board have to agree in order for it to pass.
And an open meeting.
In open meeting, yes. Asterisk there, right?
I would agree with that.
So
outside of donuts.
Yeah, I shouldn't the board set a limit as to what's petty cash, and anything over that should be approved by the board? Shouldn't there be that in their rules and regs, or somehow of definition of what the board can do?
Well, if you don't have it in writing, somebody's going to get away with something one day. I'm not a big fan of cash sitting in somebody's personal desk drawer, but $100 is probably not going to kill even a small association. But beyond that, man, the shove it, if it's over $100, move it and give somebody the specific authority to go out and do that, and have them turn in the receipt for reimbursement.
Right. I would generally say that's a great idea, Carolyn, is that if the board approves it and one person goes to get it, reimburse them through the association. That's probably a better idea than handing cash over.
We don't have any properties with petty cash. If we do take them over, we close that out as a policy. And as Carolyn said, we do ask people then, get approval and then submit the invoice for reimbursement.
Back to manager roles. It says the manager is required to have a working knowledge of the laws, CC&Rs, etc. Does the manager also have a responsibility to inform the board when they are not following the law, CC&Rs, etc.? This says, for example, have unnoticed meetings, skipping minutes, etc.
Yes. That would be my answer. Yes. Yes to all of that. As a manager, we are licensed through the International Condo Association. Through CAI, we take continued education classes. We need to know the law. We need to know the law. We need to know the new changes in the law. And we need to make sure that we are making the boards and the unit owners follow what's legal. And I would say that I've been in situations where board members push back and they choose not to follow the law, but to do the things the way that they've done before. As a manager, I would say put in writing that you recommended for them to do it X, Y, and Z to follow the law, but it's absolutely our job to make sure that we're informing you about any changes in the law because that could be our license on the line.
And it's important, once again, this goes back to what we discussed with fiduciary duty. It's important for the board of directors to enforce and follow the governing documents. Knowingly doing something against those could open them up personally for a lawsuit if they're failing to do that. Additionally, I've had properties and a rule may have been passed 5, 10, 20 years ago, and the board doesn't think it's fair, so they don't enforce it. I try to tell them we need to repeal that rule because there are people that believe that it's in the rules and that should be enforced. So if you don't feel it's fair, you don't want to enforce it, then it should be repealed. It shouldn't just be left there and ignored.
And it's
I don't
important
know.
to update your rules and regs every once in a while because everything gets out of date.
Yeah.
And again, the manager's there to direct the board members if they don't know the law or they don't know the procedures of governance. Those are the people you depend on. Those are the people you listen to, just like your consultants and your accountants, your lawyers, and your professionals. You need to listen to what they say.
And I would say that going back to with knowing the laws is to understand how the laws apply to your governing document. So keeping in mind that whatever the Condo Act says or the common interest law, those supersede what your governing documents are. So it goes back to knowing the laws in your states and also knowing the governing documents. It's important for the manager and the board to know both.
Okay, someone asked, what's the difference between self-management and managed by a company? So self-management and being managed by a professional management company.
Again, I would say it depends what that looks like to that board. That's something that the board would have to discuss. Keeping in mind that there has to be somebody licensed that is managing that association or overseeing how it acts. So definitely also look up the laws about having to have someone licensed in your state. And in Illinois, I believe they changed the 30 days, but I'd have to double check on that. And if it means collecting the assessment or there's a lot that goes into it, but it's up to the board then to make sure that every aspect is met. Whereas with a management company, you're under contract and it's the manager's job and the company's job to make sure that everything's being taken care of.
So who's responsible for making sure the association's legal name is registered?
I assume they mean the annual report. Usually what we recommend is the association attorney is the registered agent, so the association attorney will keep that up to date.
And it's always good for the secretary to be aware of that annual date and also to remind the registered agent because they get very busy. They've got a lot of properties. And depending on who that registered agent is, the secretary and the board should know that. That should be prior knowledge when they get on the board.
I agree. And I think it's always good to at least once a year for someone on the board, whether it be the secretary or president, go online to make sure the information is correct. Is what they have filed for the state listed correctly?
There's also board members that need to be listed, the president, the treasurer on that secretary report. And after, every annual meeting, should they change, that needs to be updated with the registered agent. So that current information is there with the state of Illinois.
There's another question. It says, since the manager works at the direction of the board, who is responsible for such things as consistent rule enforcement?
Both,
Yeah, really.
both.
We have a property where violations, it says in their declaration, can only be submitted by a member of the association. So we technically can't write up any violations that we see or put them in. We can inform the board, and the board could write something up. But the way it's stated, we can't go out and look for violations. But generally, it's a combination thereof. And keep in mind that homeowners can also generally, each association has a violation form, and the homeowner can submit a violation if they see something too. I know it gets touchy because people don't want to, tell on their neighbor, but that's part of community association living and part of the responsibility of living in a community association.
And
I
I would
think the
say,
board has to be careful about being consistent in enforcing the rules. It's easy to have a heartstring story about somebody's situation, or somebody's been a prior board member for many years, and we should take no. We should enforce the rules. If we don't feel the rules should be enforced anymore, see what Diane said. Get into we review a few house rules every year. Just whatever's come up that's been troublesome, and once you start going down the make an exception road, it's hard to keep traction.
And you can become liable in lawsuits where you have not been fair and equitable with all of the residents. In our association, we have the board members report the violations, we have the homeowners report the violations, and the management takes it from there. Make sure that you have a hearing. Don't give anyone a fine or anything that has not been heard, because again, you can get yourself into, as a board, all sorts of situations. But it's up to everyone to seek the infractions, but when you see a violation, to report it. And that's what keeps an association well functioning, that rules are being enforced consistently and again, efficiently, but they are being reported.
And keep in mind, if something would progress to the point where you had to go to court, if the person has an attorney or if the judge is there ruling, he probably will ask you if this has been, if everyone's been treated fairly, if other people have been written up for this violation, is there consistency? And unfortunately, neighbors talk to neighbors, so people are going to know. So for another reason you want to be consistent is if you have to go to court.
So we're talking about violations. What about complaints? Should there be a process in place to handle complaints? And Nikki, I'm sorry to cut you off. You were going to make a comment about the violations.
I was just going to say real quick to agree with what everyone said. Remain consistent. This is another one where you need to know the laws in your state or in Illinois. As Diane mentioned, there is a hearing that can be requested. As Greg mentioned, this has gone to court before. So while you're putting your association and your attorney up on trial to prove yes or no, you need to make sure you have the document, that you followed everything to the legal T and consistent. And if there's something in your governing documents that you do not want to enforce, remove it. With rules and regulations, the board can remove it. With your declarations, the association can agree to remove it. If you don't want to enforce it, find a way to remove it.
Another factor in violations is make sure that when you're reviewing the violation as a board, that there's concrete evidence, that it's not hearsay, that it's not a third party reported someone, that there's either a photo or a definite rule violation that's broken. And that's the way to keep everything consistent and also efficient. So you don't have people reporting people for something that's not even in the rules.
So how do you handle complaints? Should there be a policy or procedure in place? I know we were talking about violations, but how are complaints that come to the board or manager handled?
if they're complaining and it's not a violation, I don't know how much of a hearing they get. I mean,
Usually the
complaining about
manager,
noise, well, you know, that's you're violating quiet enjoyment and obnoxious behavior.
Well, what if it's a unit owner complaining about another unit owner? Or a unit owner complaining about how a board is running something or not reporting things correctly? How should a board handle that? Does a manager get involved in it? Is there any structural way of a board should handle those complaints coming in?
If someone's complaining about a neighbor and it's a violation, then they need to write down and fill out a violation form. There's a specific route that has to be taken, and that's based on case law. So you can call up and complain all you want, but if you're not willing to, write the written complaint, give dates and times of this complaint, what the violation is, there's really not a lot the board or management can do if you're not willing to do that. I mean, they can't have a hearing without that. They might, there's situations where I'll get calls because they can hear somebody making noise, but they can't tell me which unit it's coming from. So that's a complaint. I mean, we can send out a letter saying, please please turn down your TVs after 10 o'clock, things like that. But if you're not able to tell me exactly who's causing the violation or who's violating the rules, there's very little that the board or the association can do as far as having a hearing or anything like that. And the homeowner complaining also in cases needs to be prepared to participate in the hearing process.
Yeah.
And once again, a lot of people don't want to complain about their neighbor or write a violation about their neighbor because they have to live next door to this person or somebody else they run into the hallways. But everybody's got to play their part. If you want to take care of this and that's the route you want to go, is to have a hearing and make it a formal violation.
And I agree, and be prepared that in your hearing, they could ask who made the complaint against them and who reported the violation. So just know that. As far as complaints, if they're complaining about a vendor, it depends on what the complaint is, but you try to work with the unit owner and the vendor to correct whatever the problem is as a manager. And if your complaint is with the board, at your annual meeting, when it comes time to election, run for the board. Vote for who you want to be on the board.
well, I would say, first of all, is the complaint reasonable?
Right.
Or is it just somebody having a beef with someone else? Is it reasonable? Is it something that's in the rules? Or is it something that's just someone doesn't get along with someone else? So the board the manager, if the complaint comes to the manager has to evaluate the validity of the complaint. And usually it just takes the manager to call the person up and say, well, we're working with the landscaper so that they don't, blow all the refuse grass on your deck, that type of thing. Or is it then, if it continues, then bring it up and discuss it with the board in the executive session, then find out if it's a true violation and go from there. So usually these complaints are of different escalating, levels.
And I would also say is to keep in mind is that if you don't like your neighbor, that's a unit to unit owner disagreement. There's nothing that the management company or the board can do. If they are playing their music where you can hear them and it's during the day and it's not excessive, that's a unit owner to unit owner concern. Our hands are tied there. So like Diane was saying, we have to take a look at what the complaint is and if there's any way for the board or management to step in.
Okay, we have some follow-up questions, quite a few. Diane said they do not fine a unit owner unless they have heard from that homeowner first. We send a courtesy letter first, then issue a fine if the situation isn't corrected. The unit owner can then request a hearing with the board. Are there any concerns with this, the way they are doing it?
Yes. You can't assign any type of fine or fee or any violation before the hearing's heard. If the action takes place June 1st and for whatever reason you can't have the hearing until July 15th, you may be able to go back and make the fine effective from June 1st. but you cannot assign a fine and then offer them the opportunity to be heard. They have to be heard before you can assign any type of fine or whatever penalty you may assign.
Most declarations will have a violation procedure, and that'll be explained. And that's what we've always gone with. There has
I
to
know
be.
a lot of boards prefer to do it that way because it's quick and easy, and hopefully the people won't respond. They'll just deal with it, but legally, that's not allowed.
And the
Now, if
thing
you're
is,
talking about move in, move out fees, that's different. Some associations will just assign it because it happened. There was evidence. Somebody, saw them. It was visible. There was a rent-a-haul truck there on a Sunday night when there's moving rules. That's quite different.
And I would say on your violation, make sure you list the opportunity for a hearing and give them their 30 days. Not hearing from them is acknowledgement of the violation. So you give them the opportunity to request a hearing. If they do not request a hearing, then they're accepting the violation as it stands.
And I put that in my notice that if we don't hear back from you, it's basically an assumption of guilt.
Yep.
Okay,
Or if
next
there's a
question.
Give them a
schedule.
deadline to respond.
Or if there's a hearing schedule and they don't show up, then the decision is final of what the board decides.
Okay,
They've had
next
their
question.
opportunity.
You touched on signature cards. What is a reasonable time after the election for the management company to get the paperwork and accounts switched or updated?
Well, it depends. In our case, since we're not signatories on reserve accounts, the management company can't contact the bank and get that information. The person or persons that are the signers have to contact the bank and get that information and give them the information of who the new signatures will be.
I'm just going to take a stab and say a month. I mean, there's nothing to wait for. It's a question of coordinating schedules and stuff. If it turned out to be 5 or 6 weeks, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I think a month is a reasonable goal.
I guess it depends also on how quick you need money.
There's that.
Right.
Okay, so we are a self-managed board with a bookkeeper. We are having major issues with transparency between the board and homeowners, especially with finances. The board is not interested in learning and educating themselves in their roles, tried suggesting free courses on CAI, and they give a lot of control to the bookkeeper who has been signing their own checks. A small group of homeowners would like to have a management company to set us straight, but we aren't sure how to handle the situation. Any advice?
At any time, a homeowner can request a copy of the financials if you're concerned about where stand financially. I would just say that I think the board members, besides receiving financials, should be receiving a copy of all the paid invoices, copy of paid checks, clear checks, a copy of any and all bank statements, whether it's for reserve or operating, and they should review this to make sure that there's something. That's part of the treasurer's responsibilities, as we spoke to before. But any homeowner can request a copy of the financials.
And yes, that's another one, again, going back to the law. Know the laws. The homeowner legally can request certain financial documents that have to be provided to them. I would say ultimately it would come down to the board. Whereas with a management company, we would make sure that it's posted. We have different areas we post it where homeowners can access it, so it's all visible. The board can log on and see their information. But if there's no management company, that board is responsible. The board is the one that took the oath to make sure to take care of all the financials within that community. So if the bookkeeper is not doing something correctly, that comes back on the board for not double checking and follow through.
Oh, plus you've got a control issue. If you only have one person signing checks routinely, somebody else, you need 2 sets of fingerprints on those records. But the interesting question underneath that was, what can the homeowners do? I don't know what percentage of your association this group is, but to think a little creatively, you could create a proposed alternate budget that you as homeowners would support, including dollars for a management company. You know, we are willing to bear this cost in order to lift this burden from you, oh board members who are clearly unwilling to hold it. You know, so I'm generally in favor of trying to propose a solution rather than just crap about a problem. You could talk to management companies in the area. You could talk to other CAI members and get a sense of how big an organization and roughly what kind of money they're investing on an annual basis to know what to propose, because the management company doesn't come for free. But as I think Diane and I have, we hope, made clear, we find our management partners pretty valuable.
This, I think, is a question. Sorry, Diane, go ahead.
Management company will take all that off your hands. And that's one thing about having a management company. You don't have to worry about that because the controls are in place. For people that are self-managed that really are learning, there is one thing I just really quickly recommend. On the website for the Illinois CAI, there's a pamphlet, just a one-sheet flyer that has rights and responsibilities of homeowners and rights and responsibilities of board members. It is like the best little cheat sheet you could have as to what you need to learn if you are self-managed and don't know what your rights are as a homeowner and also as a board member.
This next question, I think, goes back to when you were talking about violations. Does management have responsibility if this process is not followed? The violation process, I believe the panel spoke to. I received a letter and asked what I violated, was told by manager to ask the board. There was no violation.
I guess so that's kind of confusing to me. Did the manager say, we'll have to ask the board, or you'll have to have a hearing with the board? Because the board's the only one that can really remove the violation. So I guess it would be more what they said as far as talk to the board, what that opened up to look like, would be my opinion.
And in the letter that you received, the violation letter should have stated what item in the governing document you violated. And then further, you know, if it's general, it may list, you know, the specific issue that you had. You know, there's some that, you know, you left your garbage cans out, you know, too late. Others may be more general, you know, nuisance. Well, what was my nuisance? And they, besides listing where in the declaration that was listed, they list the specific act that they're saying is violations of the nuisance clause. So I find that kind of interesting. You didn't get more information as far as specifically what the violation is.
We'll see if we get a follow-up. Diane, this goes to you. You had mentioned the booklet, mentioning what the defining of responsibilities. Where's the source of getting that information? Where can they get it?
It's on the CAI-Illinois.org, the CAI local website, the chapter of Illinois, and it's under I don't know right now, but it's in the website under homeowners articles and sort of like a helpful hints. It's under there. I can always get back to that person if and look it up and let them know.
Jamie, maybe Jamie will hear us and give us the link.
Jamie would hear us.
Jamie, if Jamie's on, she'll give us.
Jamie can send it to you. Ask
Jamie
Jamie.
just said she can send this to all the attendees.
Yes.
It's a great resource.
One other question.
Jamie's on staff at the office.
Yeah, Jamie Roman, who's on staff at the office, will provide it. Someone asked, what is the status of the Ombudsman Act in Illinois?
It was renewed, so it's still viable.
Did anything get funded?
No.
No, did not get funded, just got renewed. It was ready to sunset, so it was renewed as is.
Okay, we've gone through the questions at hand over there. Back to our topics, change in management company. When you're changing management company, what's the board's role, the manager's role? What are expectations? What certain things should the boards be aware of when they're
So
changing management companies?
I'll kind of give a little information, but Diane and Carolyn will probably be best at this if they've ever changed. As far as the manager's role is going to be handing off the documents they have to the new management company and make sure that the files are sent over. Other than that, the rest of it relies on the board. The board would have to interview new management companies. They have to decide which company to go for, motion to pass it. But it's also keeping in mind is that there will be bumps in the road. And I'm not saying that for anyone to stay where they're at, but there will be bumps in the road. When you go to transfer files over, or there'll be a month with assessments. So I would recommend grace and patience with the new company, because there will be bumps and everyone's trying to acclimate together. So just remember and remind the unit owners that it's going to be okay. This is just a rough patch.
What's the expectations of the exiting management company?
I would say, first of all, if you were looking for a management company, you need to ask around, you need to ask your professionals. You need to also ask people that you know that live in community associations, but you also need to know, what are you looking for? You might need to write your own RFP. Are you looking for a small, medium, or large management company? How much of that manager do you want on that property? Do you want an on-site manager? And also, before you start thinking, we want this, what is your budget? What are you willing to pay? What are you willing to afford? What are you paying now? And are you, obviously, if you're changing management companies, you're not happy with the service. So exactly what are you looking for? Know what you're looking for, know the size, know your budget, and then start investigating. Call in people, have interviews, interview at least 6 companies, and then hone that down to 3, and then hone that down to 1.
And I would say take a look at how advanced in technology you want to be able to service your association. There's some that can list everything online. Homeowners can do everything with a few clicks on their phone through an app. There are some that do not have as much of an online presence. So you would just go there to maybe read a news article. So really take a look at where and how you want to be able to use their online platforms.
Yeah, the board needs to be absolutely certain what they want to go to. You don't want to just leave a management company. There may have you taken, does the management company you're thinking about leaving understand where your frustrations are? What have you communicated to them? Have they made some good faith efforts to resolve? Have they told her just off the charts? And that's not happening in our current arrangement. But if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So it's really, really critical to talk to yourself to say, okay, what's missing here? Or possibly what do I need to get rid of here? That's not working for us. And that is part of the RFP, take apart your existing contract item by item by item. And is this what we want going forward? Is this what we want going forward? Is there an option? We'd like to know what would cost if we wanted to consider, I'll make this up, having them produce a monthly newsletter for us. Okay, that's not a standard thing, but it could happen and it'll cost something. So be sure you know what you want. And then you can talk with other folks on an informed basis and be clear about what you do want. You don't necessarily need to be clear about what you're trying to leave behind. It's not a air the laundry session. Is this new potential friend going to fit with the model that you have in mind?
I agree with Carolyn. Before you switch management companies, do have some sort of remediation with the present management company. Don't leave them cold, like we're leaving. You need to have a conversation. Can they improve? What are the problems? What are the slowing down of the services you want that you might not be getting. Give them a chance to redeem themselves, or maybe it's just the manager disconnect. Maybe it's just a problem with the manager and they request for another manager. But give the management company a chance to rectify. And then if it doesn't happen, then move on. And when you do make the transition, warn your residents that this is going to be at least a 4-month process. Give them the heads up that you're changing, that you expect some glitches. And then what you expect as a board, you expect all those records, you expect everything to be handed over in a timely fashion, and see to it and work as a board with the previous management company and the new management company that there is a smooth transition. And it does happen. There can be smooth transitions. You just have to, navigate that and direct that so you make sure that there isn't all those glitches. They will happen, but then when they do happen, you've got to account for them.
And I want to add to read your contract. Some management contracts, you have to give so much notice. Some of them, if there's no rider, you may be unable to get out of. I would read your contract to see the steps also. And to go on what Diane and Carolyn said, if you're getting ready to change your management company, what is it that you're missing? Can you talk to the supervisors and have a new manager? Can you have a new inspector? What is it that is can you remove services? Can you add services? It really goes back to what is it that you feel like you're missing and whether or not you can get it added where you're at.
Well, believe it or not, we've answered all the questions. We've gone through our agenda except for the last one, and we have a few minutes left. So let's go into that. Role of consultants, insurance broker, lawyer, attorney, engineer. Who would like to speak to that?
Spend the money. You'll never make a better investment.
I see a lot of properties that want to go out for large bids for maybe a masonry project or a roof project. And one of the things they come back with is, prices all over the board, like which one is correct. They could all be right. They could all be wrong. The problem is you're not comparing apples to apples. And in most instances, the only way you can truly compare the pricing and what you get is to hire an engineer to put together the specification. Now, frequently, depending on the size of your building, roofing or masonry projects can be easily into the 6 figures. To spend maybe 5% additional percent of the overall budget for the cost of that project really is nothing to ensure that you're getting exactly what you want for the longest life. So I highly recommend, when it comes to things like that, to spend the extra money in the long run. In the short run, it'll greatly benefit you and the association.
I would say that with the new questionnaires that are being sent out for Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA loans, that I recommend a structural engineer, and a lot of times they're requiring it just to come out and make sure that the building's been kept up, and if there's any deferred maintenance. With an insurance person, I highly recommend that they do an audit of what you currently have. Sometimes laws change and you're not noticing that you should have something that you don't have on your policy. Or are you in a flood zone whereas you were not before? So I always recommend an insurance audit just to make sure you have everything that you need.
That's a good point, Nikki. But to your point, should consultants be brought in annually or semi-annually just to talk to the board?
I would say it depends on the project. Insurance, I would say annually. With a reserve study, I believe it's every 3 years. So it really depends on an audit every year. So I think it depends on which project they're referring to, in my opinion.
Who should be the point person to these consultants?
Well, a person, it doesn't have to be the president. You may have a board member. You may have an owner who has some knowledge or abilities that relate to this project. That can be a double-edged sword. They can have their own point of view about whether this project's even necessary. So, use your brains. You do need one person to funnel it through. But I don't know that it's real critical what other role in real life that person has, as long as they're organized and they're willing to learn if they don't already have some information about it. And you've got, again, the board's specifications as to what results are wanted out of this project. You know, the engineers or architects or whoever are going to tell you how to get to where you want to go. But if you don't know where you want to go, or you can't articulate where you want to go, you're not going to get there fast.
As a management company, generally we're the point of contact, but if the board requests, we can have them present at a board meeting or, present what their findings are with the reserve study or the structural report. So with an attorney, I saw someone had mentioned an attorney. I always recommend, regardless of the size of the association, that you have an attorney on retainer. One, so each year they can check your governing documents to make sure they're still legal, right? Because sometimes they're not, depending on when they were made. There's always going to be questions throughout the year. There will always be a contract that needs a rider, or just having them available in the event something else that's liable comes up. Whereas you can meet with an attorney one time and it costs almost as much as it would to have them on retainer monthly.
Well, Nikki, to that point, someone questioned, if the board refuses to use an attorney, can an individual board member pay for one personally for the board? Otherwise, they are forced off the board because of liability.
How's it paid for? Because if it's paid for with an association money, then it would be association business. That's a tricky one. What are your thoughts, Greg? Because that's kind of...
I saw that pop up there and I've been thinking about myself. If I'm reading it correctly and understand, the board member wants to personally pay for an attorney to review. If he's doing it on behalf of the board, and the board's benefiting from the information, I think that would be okay to do. I'm just surprised if they're concerned that the entire board wouldn't want to do something like this and have the association pay for it. So I'm kind of confused. And I assume that they're forced off the board because of liability, that the person that wants to do this is concerned about liability and therefore they want to be removed, or they would want to get off to the liability. I guess, you do have D&O, directors and operators insurance, or you should make sure that's up to date. And as I said previously, unless you're intentionally not following any of your governing documents, if there would be a lawsuit, each board member would be covered under the D&O for the attorney. And, you have liability maybe for any potential expenses. So I'd make sure that you have that an adequate amount. And then as far as, paying for an attorney, if you feel that's necessary and the association won't do it, and you want to remain a part of the board, you may want to hire that out of your own pocket.
And I would say that when you do that, make sure, or my recommendation, right, would be to go to a law firm that deals with associations. They will be more familiar with the law and be able to help you a little bit more as to what direction to go. So that would be my only recommendation. But as far as getting the attorney, talk to the attorney to see what they think.
Yeah, I would recommend an attorney. That may save you money as opposed to going to somebody that's a real estate attorney or things like that. Because the question or concern you may have may be something that's common and very simple for them to respond to.
Well, or maybe the owner can make a restricted gift to offer to the board. It's going to cost us $500 to get this opinion. I have a check here to Association XYZ. If you're willing to cash it for this purpose, I will hand it over to you.
Good point.
I'd worry about who the attorney is representing if the
Right.
Owner paid directly.
So there was a question about flood zones. Obviously they do change. They have 27 buildings with at most 2 units in each. Declaration defines each building as a limited common element. Must we provide flood insurance also?
If you're in a flood zone, but it's a limited amount for flood insurance when it's in a condominium building.
But yeah, if it's in a flood zone, I would say they'd have to provide the flood insurance.
for the structure. I think it's up to 250,000, but that would be another thing that an insurance agent would be able to help you with. Or you could go to the website and it'd be able to help you with that as well.
The other thing I might recommend is I had this situation about 10 years ago where we didn't know the floodplain changed until a unit owner tried to get a mortgage and we were informed. My understanding, talking to a few people, some surveyors, is a lot of times when they put that mark in that they lose, that people look at, it's not particularly accurate. What I ended up doing was hiring a surveyor to go out and check. And in fact, we got an elevation study and found out that they actually were not in the floodplain. When they looked at the actual numbers on the drawings, it appeared, but the actual elevation, we found out we didn't. So I'm not sure how long you've had this, but that may be a consideration too, is to talk to a surveyor and see what they think. If there's, if it'd be worthwhile to do a survey and find out if in fact, maybe you're not in the flood zone.
Or you
I
could
would
Thank
ask
you,
think-
thank you all. We're at our 2:30 mark and we've addressed and answered all the questions. So thank you, all of our panel members with all of your good information. And Nikki, you had one last comment? Go ahead. Make
One
it.
last comment. So I managed an association in Hinsdale by Salt Creek, and that property actually flooded twice. And they did not expect Salt Creek to overflow. And we had to take people out on dump trucks, cars, underground cars were ruined. So my recommendation would be that if you're even close to that floodplain, talk to an insurance agent, because there was a lot of loss and twice. So they had to come in and put up special flood parameters, but if it's recommended, I recommend it.
Thank you. Again, thank you, panel members. And thank you, our audience, for listening to this. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.